This silver spoon was merchandised nationwide to atheists by Otto Wettstein, an Illinois watchmaker and jeweler who was active in the free thought movement. Well, as you leave this room, there's an audio kiosk at which you can hear 3 Thomas Edison recordings of Ingersoll speaking, plus 2 renditions of a long-forgotten Robert Ingersoll Grand March. The sound files are also available on our website. Now, you heard the booming voice of Ingersoll in the video. That was Saul Elkin, then the director of the University at Buffalo Theater Department and regionally quite prominent Shakespearean actor and director. Ingersoll, at least how he sounded bellowing into Thomas Edison's recording horn in 1897, sounded a lot more like this. Which actually makes sense when you think about it, because one of the things you had to do when you were an orator back then, before they had these things, is you had to be able to throw your voice out great distances. And it takes a lot less energy to get a high-pitched sound wave to travel a long distance than to get a low-pitched bass tone to go the same distance. So in those days, there would be something to be said for a rating like this. Fortunately, these aren't those days, so I'll stop talking like that. Next, you'll pass through, oh, wait, there we go. There he is again. He pops up everywhere, that little scamp. Next, you'll pass through a room devoted to local history, which is guest curated by Dresden's village historian. Now, I mentioned that there's a conservative Baptist church in Dresden that reviles our presence. It's a small rural village. You might have asked, why is the place still standing? Well, early in the restoration, we connected with the gentleman who serves as the volunteer village historian, whose basement was crammed to bursting. Whenever anybody in town died, the kids would bring over the family Bible, the family slide trays, the photo albums, and give them to him. And he'd run out of room. So we said, Mr. Welker, how would you like 2/3 of the second floor of the museum as your workroom, permanently? And he thought that would be great. So now, whenever any of these nice Baptists think about, hey, maybe I should torch the Inger hut. Oh, wait. Ah, Grandpa's photo album is up there. So it's the local history room, or as we call it, our secondary fire insurance policy. Now, of course, any good museum tour has to end in the gift shop. And after you're done buying it out, just take a side trip upstairs, where the actual room in which Ingersoll was born has been restored and furnished as a poor country parson's home might have been furnished in 1833. Well, now this will conclude your visit to the Ingersoll Museum, but I mentioned that the entire region is rich in free thought history. In the 19th century, West Central New York was a cauldron of social and political and religious ferment, the Southern California of its age, if you will. The U.S. women's suffrage movement, spiritualism, the Mormon and Seventh-day Adventist churches all originated there. So did signal advances in free thought. The region is so rich with free thought sites that the Council for Secular Humanism has established an informal free thought trail of marked and unmarked sites within about a 2-hour drive of Dresden. Well, first let's look at Seneca Falls. Suffrage landmarks there include the site of the 1848 Women's Rights Convention, the wellspring of the suffrage movement. Part of the Wesleyan chapel in which the event was held still stands in downtown Seneca Falls. It's now a National Historic Park with an impressive adjacent museum established by the U.S. Park Service. Most leaders of the women's rights movement were freethinkers, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Matilda Jocelyn Gage. A statue in Seneca Falls commemorates an 1851 meeting on the village streets between Susan B. Anthony, the radical dress reformer Amelia Bloomer — you can see that she's not wearing a dress, she's wearing her bloomers — and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Now, alongside Matilda Jocelyn Gage, Anthony and Stanton would become leaders of the suffrage movement, the so-called first wave feminist movement. But there was often some tension between Anthony on the one hand and Stanton and Gage on the other, because Stanton, and in particular Gage, were far more outspoken on Christianity's guilt for trampling the rights of women. Anthony feared repelling any potential ally for suffrage and hence favored a more church-friendly stance. Stanton's Seneca Falls home has been lavishly restored by the National Park Service, although I will give you fair warning, if you take the guided tour, you'll learn a lot more about how the National Park Service lavishly restores homes than you will about Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Well, now we can move to Rochester. And there, Susan B. Anthony's home is a privately owned museum that we won't let you see. There it is. This is where she lived when she was arrested for illegally casting a vote. To the east in Fayetteville, the Gage home is being restored by a foundation under the leadership of feminist historian Sally Resch Wagner. In fact, I took this picture about a year and a half ago, and they've done an enormous amount of work on the house. So when you go to Fayetteville, it won't look anything like that. It'll look a lot better. But Gage Home displays its holdings from time to time and hopes to establish a museum. Now, Matilda Jocelyn Gage is interesting for two reasons. One is her own work and advocacy. The other is who her daughter married, an unknown ne'er-do-well named L. Frank Baum. And L. Frank Baum absorbed a lot of free-thinking philosophy from Gage. So the next time you're watching that pay no attention to the man behind the curtain scene, think about it in those terms. L. Frank learned a thing or two from his mother-in-law. Well, then we can now drop south to Elmira, and there we find a statue of Mark Twain and the Octagon Study in which he completed several of his novels. This and a museum are all on the campus of Elmira College. And there's the site of the museum. Twain's grave lies in Elmira's Woodlawn Cemetery. Well, we move on again to Syracuse. Ta-da-da! And there, the home of abolitionist and regional freethought leader C.D.B. Mills, father of prominent suffragette Harriet May Mills, is undergoing restoration. And I presume this doesn't look like that anymore either. Okay, on to Ithaca. And Ithaca is the home of Cornell University, the first secular university in the United States. And the mansion of Andrew Dixon White, one of its founders and first president. White's an interesting character. He and Ingersoll actually met once on a transatlantic crossing. They talked about art. But Andrew Dixon White is best known as the accidental immortalizer of the so-called military metaphor of warfare between science and theology. White actually meant to undermine that point of view, but his book became a bestseller at the time and had an influence rather unlike what he planned for it. So he wound up being one of two writers who cemented in the public mind that religion and theology were at war. His mansion still stands on the Cornell campus. It houses academic offices. Now, one of the richest locations along the Freethought Trail, although it contains no marked sites, is the village of Watkins Glen. Watkins, as the village was then known, was the site of the New York Freethinkers Convention of 1878, despite its name a national gathering. And there, D.M. Bennett, publisher of the influential Freethought paper The Truth Seeker, was arrested with two others for selling a sex manual called Cupid's Yokes. The arrest became a national cause célèbre that would soon involve figures including Ingersoll and U.S. President Rutherford B. Hayes. Outdoor portions of the convention were held at the Village Park, which still exists along 4th Street. The indoor portions were held in the meeting hall that stands on the northeast corner of 4th and Franklin Streets. Now, they didn't have modern fire codes back then, so the way you built these buildings was to have commercial space on the front, then